Hi everyone, going to try to do a quick flip through all of my Hawkman pages. One of those weird collectors that follows characters rather than artists. Have my favorite Hawkman artist, but I've been a Hawkman fan since I was about probably 6 or 7 years old, watching Super Friends in front of the TV on Saturday morning. I'll start with pages from back in the 60s and work my way forward until just a couple of years ago. This first page is from 1967, Pencils and Inks by Murphy Anderson, Hawkman number 20, page 5. One of the things I always liked about Hawkman and Hawkgirl was that their wings and ability to fly were actually artificial, so any pages where they're putting on or taking off their wings and helmet always particularly appeals to me. So you can see them doing that in the first panel here. Well, after that first run of Hawkman, it was about 20 years before he got his own comic book again. And during that time, he appeared in backup features and other comics and in the Justice League. On the left is a page from a backup story in Detective Comics number 434 from 1973 with pencils by Rich Buckler and inks by Dick Giordano. And I really enjoyed this backup feature and the whole series of them in Detective Comics because it showcased that Hawkman was a police officer and a detective from his home planet of Thanagar. And again, here's a good picture of Hawkman putting his artificial wings and costume on before going out to fight crime. On the right is a page I'm very fond of from the Justice League of America number 145 from 1977 with pencils by Dick Dillon and inks by Frank McLaughlin. I have really fond memories of this comic because when I was a kid, I actually used Silly Putty to make a copy of Hawkgirl's face from one of the pages for those old enough to remember using Silly Putty. Hawkman got another set of tryout issues in Showcase Presents numbers 101 to 103 in 1978 with pencils by Al Milgrom and inks by Murphy Anderson. I particularly love these comics because they focus on the science fiction origins of the Silver Age Hawkman and Hawkgirl, and also includes Adam Strange and his cast as guest characters in the series. These are also personally meaningful to me because the very first comic book I bought was Showcase number 103 that I picked up from an old used bookstore. And I love that comic to death. Read it again and again until the cover fell off and I had to staple it back on. I love the inset panel here with Adam Strange bursting into Hawkman's cruiser and the spacesuits that are flying out into the vacuum of space, which becomes a plot point later on in the series. Next up are a couple of pages making a double page spread from Showcase number 102 that shows the fleets of Ran and Thanagar aligned against each other in orbit over the planet Ran, and Hawkman trying to navigate his cruiser between them without being destroyed. Love any appearance of the Hawk Cruiser. Remember seeing that on the Super Friends cartoon as a kid, and so whenever it showed up in the comic, I was thrilled, and love getting any pages that actually include the ship. Sorry these aren't taped together, but I actually acquired them that way, even though I didn't get them from Anthony, and didn't want to add tape to them. And from the same issue, two sequential pages, 6 and 7, of Hawkman and Hawkgirl fighting off the forces of Ran as they try to escape, until Sardath manages to teleport their ship and the rest of them into a hangar to effect repairs. I love the perspective on this page with the close-up of Sardath's face and then the ship in the background, of course. I don't think I can adequately express how lucky I feel to own this cover to Showcase number 103 with pencils and inks by Joe Kubert. Again, this was the first comic I'd ever purchased, so owning it feels a little bit dreamlike. Every time I look at it, I think I'm a little bit giddy. Obviously, Kubert's work on the Hawks is pretty legendary, Hawkman being the first character he drew professionally, and then also revitalized their look for the Silver Age. I also love the Bronze Age quality of this cover in terms of showing the science fiction elements of Hawkman and Hawkgirl as they fight the giant monster with their ray guns. Just a quick pause after that cover. And the next few pages are from DC Comics Presents number 11 in 1979, pencils by Joe Staton, inks by Frank Chiaramonte. Love this comic that portrays a clash of titans between the two big DC superheroes of Superman and Hawkman. And as you can see in the final panel, Hawkman is pummeling Superman with enough force to knock down the Eiffel Tower. This comic is also really special to me because it's the very first one that I picked up off the spinner rack back at a grocery store in West Virginia. So really a dream to own these pages as well. And this next page has some great Superman action as he's showing off for a photographer who won a contest. But the thing I really love about it is the little quiet conversation between Superman and Hawkgirl as she's worried about what's going on with Hawkman. And Superman's trying to figure out why Hawkman's trying to kill him. And for a while, Hawkman and Hawkgirl were regular features in World Finest Comics. And these two pages are from number 264 and 265 from 1980, with pencils by Ken Landgraf and inks by Armando Gil. On the left, Hawkgirl's been hit by a car, and Hawkman is facing some helplessness and frustration in dealing with that. On the right, Hawkman fighting in space against some aliens as he's trying to track Hawkgirl down, who's left him temporarily after changing her name to Hawkwoman. The next set of pages are really my favorite run of Hawkman. Starting in 1985 with the Shadow War of Hawkman miniseries, Tony Isabella really fleshed the characters out like no one had before. Richard Howell was the penciler on the miniseries and most of the ongoing series afterwards, and for me is one of the best Hawkman artists ever. These pages are from the first issue of the miniseries, with inks by Alfredo Alcala, and I absolutely loved his inking throughout the miniseries. The texture on the wings of the characters is just amazing to me. So really an iconic version of Hawkman that stood out for me as I was reading these in high school. And another pair of pages by Howell and Alcala from the final issue of the miniseries when Hawkman blows up his cruiser, killing 7 evil Thanagarians aboard, which will play out later in the series. I love the inking work here, and again, I love any page with the ship that's shown. So seeing it blown up at the time was pretty dramatic. But really, the bottom right panel of the page is what just sells it for me, is the care between Cher and Qatar after he's been injured on his ship. The next set of pages are from Hawkman Special Number 1 by Richard Howell and Ron Randall. This issue reintroduced the Gentleman Ghost, or Gentleman Jim Craddock, one of Hawkman's classic villains going all the way back to the Golden Age, and made it clear that he was actually a ghost and not just a trickster. The page on the right does a nice job of giving a single-page recap of everything that happened in the miniseries, including Hawkman blowing up his cruiser and killing the Thanagarians aboard. Next 3 pages are pages 8, 9, and 10 from the series, where we see Hawkman and Hawkgirl called into Midway City Museum to investigate a disturbance, which is an opening into the astral plane, where they're pulled into physically for Hawkman to deal with the spirits of the dead from his Thanagarian cruiser explosion. One of the fun things about this issue for me was just that Hawkman was always portrayed as a real skeptic about anything spiritual, whereas Hawkgirl was the more spiritual of the pair. And here Hawkman has to deal with each of the people that were slain by his actions in turn so they can pass on to the next phase of existence. And now picking up with the regular series starting in 1986, issue number 3 on the left, with an homage to Alfred Hitchcock and the Birds. Now Richard Howell continued as penciler and was joined by Don Heck as inker. The page on the right is from issue number 5 and features the return of one of Hawkman's classic Silver Age villains, Lion Mane, who even appeared in a candy bar commercial with Hawkman. 2 more pages from Hawkman number 5. And these pages, love seeing Hawkman and Hawkgirl again without their helmets on and actually getting them in flight. A little quick appearance from Gentleman Jim Craddock as well. And the fight continues with Lion Mane. Does not go well for Hawkman as he gets in close and has his wings ripped off and then skewered by a spear. Love the panel with Lion Mane roaring in victory at the end as well. And now a solo action page of Hawkgirl by Richard Howell and Carlos Garzon from issue number 13 of the series. Always nice to see Hawkgirl in action, particularly against some sci-fi monsters from Thanagar. Page on the left is from the final issue of the 80s Hawkman series with pencils by Ed Hannigan and inks by Don Heck. Was really sad to see the series end. On the right is one of the prized pieces in my collection. It's the cover to the official Hawkman Index number 2, which actually was not published by DC Comics. It's oversized art, obviously, and with pencils and inks by Richard Howe. One interesting thing about it to me is that they're clearly flying over New York City with the Chrysler Building in the background, despite the fact that their base of operations was Midway City in DC Comics. But love everything about this cover. I think that it's a gorgeous representation of Hawkman and Hawkgirl, and it captures the joy of them flying together. 2 years after the end of the previous Hawkman series, Hawkman comes back in the miniseries Hawkworld by Timothy Truman, who did the writing duties, the pencils, and was inked by Enrique Alcatina. This is from issue number 3 of the miniseries, which is the first real meeting between Hawkman and Hawkgirl in the new continuity. As much as I love the miniseries, and particularly the lush art throughout it, it is the mark of a downturn for the character as his continuity became a complete mess. They updated his origin for more modern retelling, but instead of setting it in the past, they set it in the present of DC Comics, and Hawkman just began a downward spiral from here. This did mark the first major change in the look of the characters, giving them the metal wings and leather outfits rather than the costumes they'd had all the way from the Silver Age. And in the Hawkworld miniseries, I really got a bit of a Grimjack vibe from the art with the sci-fi elements that were introduced. The Hawkworld miniseries was followed by a new ongoing starting in 1990 of Hawkworld. And this is the cover to issue number 18 with pencils and inks by Graham Nolan. Oh, I should mention that was also the first purchase I made from Dueling Dealers. Hawkworld issue number 5, pages 20 and 21 by Graham Nolan and Rick Burchett, where Hawkman dons a shadow generator to fight the Shadow Thief. On the left is Hawkworld number 7, page 5 by Graham Nolan and Gary Krapitz. This is Hawkman and Hawkgirl in pursuit of their villain Bith from their very first appearance in Brave and the Bold number 34. On the right is a page from Hawkworld Annual number 1, pencils and inks by Gary Krapitz, where Hawkman and Hawkgirl are in pursuit of a giant monster that had broken out of a prison. On 2 pages from Hawkworld number 13 by Tom Mandrake, storing pencils and inks, where Hawkman teams up with Firehawk to fight the villain Marauder. The page on the left is from Hawkworld number 15 with pencils and inks by Graham Nolan. Actually one of my favorite pages showing Hawkman and Hawkgirl together. During Hawkworld's era, they were not a couple like they were for the rest of their history, so this is one of the pages that shows them starting to actually fall in love with each other. The page on the right is from Hawkworld Annual number 2 with pencils and inks by Gary Krapitz, showing Hawkman in battle with the villain Attila that was introduced earlier in the series. 2 additional pages from Hawkworld Annual number 2 by Gary Krapitz. Here, Hawkman and Hawkgirl manage to destroy Attila by flying it out into space. Love the space scene on the right. On the left is a page from Hawkworld number 27 in 1992 with pencils by Jander Seema and inks by Ober Jones. This is actually the first appearance of the modern age White Dragon. If you watch the Peacemaker show, that was Peacemaker's dad, white supremacist and all-around evil villain. Unfortunately, this era of Hawkman also introduced what I think is probably their worst or second worst costumes. Gold and red with metal golden wings. So they brought the feather specks, kept the metal, and made them really garish. On the right is a page from Hawkworld number 29, also by Jander Seema and Ober Jones, and this was actually the first meeting between the modern age Hawkman and Hawkwoman with their Golden Age counterparts. And one more page from Hawkworld number 29 by Seema and Jones. This one, from a story perspective, is pretty special to me because Hawkman from the Golden Age actually decides that the modern age Hawkman is worthy of the name. The next half dozen pages are all from the final Hawkworld Annual, number 3 from 1992 by Luke McDonnell and inks by Roy Richardson. There seemed to be an infatuation for a while with having Hawkgirl become mind-controlled and having Hawkman and Hawkgirl fight together. And so I think this was really the first issue where that happened. So in this case, she was taken over by Eclipso, that was the running villain through all the DC annuals that summer. A page from the new self-titled Hawkman series from 1993, so number 1 by Jander Seema and Rick Magyar, and a new costume, dark blue, big red hawk emblem, and golden metal wings. And 2 consecutive pages from Hawkman number 2 by Jander Seema and Rick Magyar. with a guest appearance by Green Lantern. And again, Hawkman versus Shiera, although in this case it was just someone made up to look like her. And now the cover to issue number 5 with pencils and inks by Jander Sema. Again, Hawkman and Hawkgirl fighting each other. In this case, they'd even switched bodies. And a couple of pages from Steve Lieber and Kurt Schultz from Hawkman number 10 and 14. A new Hawkman costume, back to the bare chest and gray wings. The page on the left is Hawkman number 17 by Steve Lieber and Kurt Schultz. I picked this one up on the Wheeling and Dealing with Anthony show, Hawkman versus a Giant Serpent. Here you can see Hawkman doesn't have his wings. One of the changes I disliked from this era is that they made his wings something that were part of his body that he could summon up when he wanted them. Took away from that idea of the artificial wings that anybody could put on. On the right, a page from Hawkman number 21 in 1995 by guest penciler Ron Lim and inker Mark McKenna. You can see Hawkman sprouting his wings that rip his shirt off as they come out, and he fights his classic villain, the Shadow Thief. And on the left, another page by Steve Lieber, inked by Kurt Schultz from Hawkman number 26, where Hawkman fights the Batman villain Scarecrow. On the right, the splash page from Hawkman number 27, also by Steve Lieber, with inks by Jerry Bingham. Really love this splash page. I like the rendition of Hawkman fighting the Hawk God avatar that ends up destroying Thanagar. Love the wings, love the use of his Qatar blade and the mace that's on its hip. Next is another splash page, this time by Anthony Castrillo and Hannibal Rodriguez from Hawkman number 29, and also the following pages 6, 7, and 8. At this point, Hawkman really started to go off the rails. They had him become insane, had all the other incarnations of Hawkman all in his head. After this, Hawkman became editorially toxic and was deemed off limits to be used as a character for almost a decade. The page on the right is actually from Hawkman number 43 in 2005 by Joe Bennett and Roy Jose, after Jeff Johns had brought the character back and tried to make him a little more understandable. Although at this point, Hawkman is really Carter Hall, not the Qatar Hall space cop from Thanagar. I love the cinematic look of the page where he swoops down from the building to save the boy who had just jumped. And 2 pages from Hawkman Convergence from 2015, Timothy Truman pencils and Enrique Alcatina inks. And the cover to Hawkman number 17 from the latest Hawkman series in 2019 by Pat O'Leaf and Tom Palmer. Really couldn't pass this one up with the appearance of the Shadow Thief. This is a variant cover to number 17. And just a few quick commissions. On the left is Timothy Truman, a commission my wife actually got for me back in 1999. On the right, Hawkman vs. Shadow Thief by Steven Sadowski. And this one probably looks familiar to you since Bill sent it to me. This is Hawkman by Ravi Amore from the Comic Art Live event back in November of last year. And finally, if I can pick up this heavy portfolio without knocking over my tripod, a double-page spread from Hawkman number 32 by Joe Bennett and Roy Jose from 2005. Love this look of Hawkman flying out of a base that's about to explode. Pretty difficult to see, but he's actually got the Atom riding on his right shoulder as he escapes the explosion. Thanks for watching. Hope that wasn't too difficult for the non-DC fans.